This is the Bitfenix Enso. It is a budget tempered glass case with some interesting features and some interesting building experiences. So let's take a look. So let's take a tour of the case. On the front panel you have the addressable RGB headers, or the addressable RGB LEDs rather, for the ASUS Aura Sync. This is exclusive to ASUS Aura Sync, so don't try and use this with any other motherboard, as the addressable header, which uses 5 volts data and ground, will not work. The pinout is different, so unless you can find one that matches this pinout, then it's ASUS or nothing. There is an RGB fan up the back of the case, which does use a standard 4-pin RGB header, which you can use with any motherboard, but obviously for the front panel LEDs, that is ASUS only. On the top of the case, on the left hand side, you have the microphone headphone jacks, hard drive activity LED and power LED, as well as an RGB button if you want to control that via the button as opposed to the software. You can also use the power and reset and the 2 USB 3 ports on the top. Another interesting feature is actually the removable dust filters in the chassis. So you actually have 2 up the front individually for 2 of the 320mm fans. You can remove the top bracket if you want to, and there's no fan filter for the top, so just bear that in mind. And also in terms of airflow, you're basically only really getting airflow from the bottom here and a small amount through the side. So this isn't the most high airflow case, but it does leave a nice aesthetic, and it's nice to still have the fan filters anyway. You do also have a third larger filter down the bottom for the power supply. These are all removable from the left hand side of the case, which means that they're actually a lot easier to clean than some cases. Taking a quick look on the back of the chassis, you'll notice the 120mm adjustable height fan mount, as well as the 7 PCIe slots. Now, just want to make it clear that these PCIe slots are actually outside the case, and you have to remove the sliding bracket first before you can access all of the PCIe slots. I really don't tend to like this kind of configuration. It's only really seen on cheaper cases and generally just gets in the way more than is helpful in any manner. The rear side panel is fairly thin, but does allow for a decent amount of cable management inside the case itself. There's probably about a finger width, which is a decent enough amount of room for your 24 pins and all that sort of stuff, so I'm not too worried about that. There is a power supply basement in this case, although I'd mentioned that the dual hard drive cage, which you can only put 2.5-inch hard drives in this one, is actually very close to the power supply. So when I was going through the building process of installing this system, I actually had a lot of trouble just installing the power supply due to the cables coming out of the modular connections hitting the case for the hard drive mount, and it's just a bit of a pain, and it's riveted in, so you can't move this around at all. You'd have to drill through the rivets and then drill more holes in the case to move it forward. I believe that it's that far back just because they're allowing a 360mm rad in the front, but it's not that accessible. And trying to install a water cooler in the front was also a bit of a pain. I suspect that this is probably just this specific unit and not necessarily every Enso case, but my unit, I physically could not remove the front panel. One of the pins that hold it in, so the pressure pins, the manual says all you have to do is put your hand onto the front and pull, but after numerous attempts, including using pliers to squish the push pin that was holding it in, using literally my knee inside of the case, wrenching with all of the force I couldn't get the front panel off, and it still hasn't been off to this point. So this is something that's a pretty big issue with this specific case, but probably not necessarily an issue with every Enso. Also to mention, there is another SSD mount, or 2.5-inch drive mount on the back of the motherboard tray. This is removable, and you can just add the drive on top of it and then put the tray back in with the removable thumb screw. This is quite a nice design, and it's nice to see that sort of extra functionality in what is a pretty budget case. When it comes to the cable routing, cable management options for the chassis, there are a little bit limited. You have 2 rubber grommets, which are actually extremely thin and came off every time I pushed any cable through them, so just bear that one in mind. You do also have an area for the 8-pin to come through, but I recommend installing the power supply in this case first, and then routing all of your wires first before then installing stuff like the motherboard, as it actually gets it to be a very small gap up the top while you're trying to push the 8-pin through past your motherboard. The rest of the building experience was pretty nice. I would mention though that they don't include a standoff installation tool, so I had to go get a 5mm socket and a sort of screwdriver handle to install the 3 other motherboard standoffs, as they were very, very difficult to do by hand. So just bear that in mind, that you might want to use a 5mm socket to install those. I think overall the case has a very nice aesthetic, although I feel like they may have gone aesthetic over functionality in some of the design areas. Obviously, in terms of the airflow airflow from the chassis, it is certainly limited on the front, and while you do have good airflow on the top, you basically can't install any, water cooling radiators up there. Of course, for my chassis, I couldn't take the front off, but there is a decent amount of space in the front, so if you do want to install even a custom water cooling loop, there is a lot of space to be had here. Although with that said, there isn't any, what I would say is space for reservoir and pump mounts. These may have to be custom fitted, so just bear that one in mind. But otherwise, this is still an impressive case, especially for the price. But I feel like, as I said, they may have gone for style over function in some of these areas. My personal opinion of the case is that it's nice, but I don't know that I could necessarily recommend it to everyone. As I said, I physically cut my hands while trying to, work on this case. So it is certainly on the more budget side of things. The build quality and materials are a bit of a pain. And actually, just to give you a perfect example of that, you have to be very careful when taking the rear side panel off, as the tabs that hold the side panel onto the case are very, very thin and bend ridiculously easily. So actually I had to get a pair of pliers to reseat and relocate those sort of little pins to be able to put the side panel back on. So moving on to scoring, for me, I think this is going to be a 4 for 5 money. It does a decent job, but it's not perfect, and while you still get a really nice tempered glass side panel with all the sort of padded foam edges and stuff like that, the build materials for the rest of the case do kind of let it down. When it comes to performance, I'm going to go with a 4, and in terms of functionality, I think I'm going to go with a 4 as well, especially the fact that they've locked you out from using any other motherboard except from ASUS here is a little bit of a pain. When it comes to styling, they've definitely gone all out on that one, so I'm going to go with a 4.5, and I think in terms of TechteamGB score, it's going to be a 3.5 and a silver award. It's an impressive case, and if you're after something with a really nice stylish aesthetic, and you are already going with an ASUS motherboard, then this might be a perfect choice for you. But for the majority of the time, there may be other options that might be a sort of similar price point but a little bit better built, or at the very least still very stylish but a little bit more functional. So with that said, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. Is this stylish aesthetic enough to pull you in, or are you going to pick up one of these cases? I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. Also, if you want to check out the pricing when and where you watch this, take a look at the link in the description down below, as there'll be a couple available to you and you can see what the price is and stuff like that. And of course, if you want to support me, there is a Patreon link down there too. That helps with all the projects that I do and all that sort of stuff. And of course, if you want to support me in a non-directly monetary way, then there's an Amazon and Overclockers UK affiliate link down there too. There will be some other videos over here for you to check out. And of course, if you're new to the channel, feel free to hit that subscribe button as well. And otherwise, we'll see you all in the next video.